Welcome to episode 2 of Rockstar Violinist, the podcast featuring the journey and the music of non-traditional violinists. What do we mean by that? Well, for hundreds of years, the musical role of violinist has been pretty well defined. There have been fantastic artists and players doing amazing things, but mostly within a certain box. However, in the last generation or so, a few players have ventured outside that box. Stefan Grappelli was one of the first with his gypsy jazz sound. Last week, we talked with Mark Wood, the world's first heavy metal violinist. If you missed that episode, I highly recommend going back and listening to it. He's a fascinating guy with a great story. Rockstar Violinist is brought to you by two amazing sponsors, D'Addario and Kodabow. D'Addario makes the most popular strings for electric violinists, and Kodabow is a premier carbon fiber bow manufacturer in the world. This week, we are talking with Evan Garr. Evan plays violin with Al Di Meola, one of the most revered guitar players in jazz history. You're listening to Evan and Al right now. This is Al Di Meola's seminal shredder piece called Race with the Devil. In this episode, you'll hear about how Evan got his start in the public school music system in Detroit and pretty much taught himself how to be one of the most impressive violinists I've ever been in a room with. He'll tell you the story of how he got the job with Al, which is a fascinating story which will seriously inspire you. And he'll share some secrets about jazz violin and some of his techniques. It's a great interview, and I know you're going to enjoy him play. This interview was recorded backstage in Durham, North Carolina, right before the very first show of the 2017 Al Di Meola Elegant Gypsy 40th Anniversary Electric Tour. So sit back and enjoy. There's going to be a lot of serious stuff here. So how old were you when you first started playing?
So I was about 10 years old. I actually started with piano.
Okay.
So piano first. And then I think I did drums second. I was about 9 during this period, 8, 9. And so my mother had spent a lot of money on instruments that I didn't really play. I still played piano, but not as much. And so she wasn't going to, we had to play something. That was her thing, because they came up playing piano, so we had to play something. So anyway, so she wasn't going to spend any more money. So she just said, well, you're going to have to play what we have. And so her sister actually had a violin, like just at the house under the bed. And so my mother remembered that, and she said, hey, I need that violin because Evan's going to play. And I did not want to play. I thought it was a girl's instrument. So that was my thinking.
Right.
You know, but she forced me to play, and I started, I think I was in 4th grade, something like that. Okay. Just public school.
Right.
You know. So, and from there on, let's see, public school, maybe in about 4 or 5 months, I started doing private lessons.
Okay.
And it was the same teacher who was at the public school.
Oh, okay.
So private lessons. But I only took classical for maybe about 4 years, a little less than 4 years. And then but all that time, I was in the basement playing or trying to pick up jazz and trying to pick up the different R&B things that we grew up listening to. Since I'm from Detroit, so it's like
right.
a big, Stevie Wonder and Luther Vandross and things of that nature. Anita Baker.
So that's who your mom listened to in the house.
Oh yeah, well actually more so my father.
Okay.
My mom listened to everything. She listened to jazz, some rock stuff. She listened to classical. And so that's how she got me kind of into those different brands of music, So, but yeah, I was in the basement just trying to play that stuff. Awesome. So classical was cool, but it didn't really connect as much as it probably should have.
Sure.
So the jazz stuff kind of connected more for some reason. So Jean-Luc Ponty and Doug Cameron was another one that really, and then Noel Pointer was another violinist that really stood out. And so those guys, they were playing stuff that was more interesting.
Right.
So the classical was good because I got my foundation with the technique. But the music just didn't, So then I went on to that jazz stuff. So now I picked up another technique, and more so saxophone type line.
Okay.
So because Jean-Luc, if you ever look up his story, he was always into Coltrane.
Yeah. You can totally hear that too.
Exactly. So a lot of his lines are more saxophone. Even his sound, he doesn't really sound like a violin. It's more warm.
Yep.
So that's where I kind of got the idea, to have a different sound with my violin.
Right.
So it's not really a violin. It's kind of like a horn / vocal for the R&B stuff,
And it's funny how many people we hear that are like, I don't want my violin to sound like a horn. I want it to sound like a violin. Mm-hmm. And you went the other way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome.
So, any other questions?
Yeah. So then you did you quit school band and just sort of move on to your own thing, or did you stay in band all through school or orchestra?
Good question. So, let's see, 4th grade. So from 4th, so about 8th grade, they still had school orchestra. Mm-hmm. And I was in it, but I wasn't really, I was there, but I wasn't really playing what the orchestra was playing. So I always had a problem with my teachers. But by 9th grade, I went to a school that had no orchestra, no violins, no strings of what. So it was just like a big band type sound.
Right.
And actually, they had what was called a jazz band.
Right.
So the jazz band, got your rhythm section, piano, bass, drums. And then they also had like clarinet, trumpet.
Yeah, it's usually like a big band thing is what they do in school.
Kind of like right.
Yeah.
And so I was the only violinist.
Okay.
And so that's actually when I got like my first electric, because I told my mother, I was like, well, I'm in band and nobody's going to be able to hear me. And so she went out and she purchased, I got a Fender.
Okay.
And I think it's the only violin Fender makes, that FV01 or something like that.
Yep.
So it was a white Fender 4-string.
Yep.
And it just so happened the school had an amplifier.
Okay.
Because it was a guitar player, I guess, that had went there and he graduated. So I used the school's amplifier. And that was the start of my, learning jazz, really learning jazz.
Right.
And so, that's how it happened. So that was awesome.
So you were learning to read and to improv all at the same.
So I learned to read, and when I got maybe in 9th grade, I got away from reading. So even now, I can still read, but it's not as fluent. Because if I hear something, I can pretty much play it.
Right.
So my reading it's improved because Meola, he makes us read. But it's so funny because even without, I've learned most of his music just from ear. So even now, I don't really use the charts. I just use the charts when we're rehearsing.
Yeah.
But after rehearsal, I don't really use the charts. I
just as a reference. Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. So then you actually were in woodshop at the time in school, right? Mm-hmm. And you sort of were able to combine this with music. How?
Well, I always had a passion for construction. So even when I was young, I kind of built things in my mother's backyard, grandmother's backyard. So when I actually went to, in about 10th grade, so I went to Votech, it was a vocational school, to learn carpentry. I learned how to use the different machines, so bandsaws and so forth. And I was able to actually make an instrument. And I was about 16. And so I tried to make an electric. So first I made an acoustic, which didn't come out too good. But then I made an electric. But I had the thumb planes and everything. I went and bought some templates offline. And so I tried to make one. It came out not that well. It was kind of okay. But and then I learned how to put wire pickups.
Right.
Because a buddy of mine, he showed me how to use a soldering iron. And so I learned how to wire pickups. So it was all in that 16, 17 bracket, that age range,
That's awesome. And you said you still got all the violins that you made, right?
I still got all my prototypes. Yeah,
awesome.
Still got them at home.
We have to bust one of those out.
Right.
So you're a little spoiled on violins right now, though, because tell people what you're playing.
Okay, so right now I'm playing a 5-string Fornis Fuse. And Evan Fornis, mine is green, and he kind of in I guess you would call it the heel. So right past the scroll, and then you got the neck, and so the heel part on his original models, it kind of has a point. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really gel with the point because it kind of stabbed my hand just for my playing style.
Right.
So for me, it didn't work. So I asked him if he could sand that down, and then I don't have the the bout,
Yep.
the removable bout. So I don't have that either. So there's no hole on the side of my instrument. But so that's what I'm playing now. But I also switched from that. I have Zeta. I have a 5-string Zeta Jazz Fusion. And actually, I had that first before the Fuse. But the Fuse kind of fits my sound, but I'm looking for that horn sound a little bit more. The Zeta has more of a bite, as most people know. So for like the rock stuff with Al, some of the songs, the Zeta really works.
Right.
But then when I'm doing like kind of background parts or melodic parts, I need that warmer sound.
Sure.
So that's what I'm using. Then I just got a acoustic from Zeta. So it's the one with the Stratos bridge. It's another 5-string. I only play 5-string.
Yeah. Who needs to mess with a 4-string?
Right, exactly. But Jean-Luc Ponty only plays
That's
5.
right. That's right.
And we got a chance to talk, me and Jean-Luc, and he asked me, he said, well, what do you play? He said, 4 or 5? And I was like, I play 5. And he was like, good. He's like, you're a good man.
Well, we'll get to Jean-Luc in a second.
Yeah.
But sort of when you finished high school, you were sort of looking for a gig, right? I mean, you ended up playing with somebody around Detroit.
Yeah, well, I was doing some local things, and I still do some local things when I can. But I didn't really get like a big gig until maybe a little bit later. I did have an offer actually when I was in the 11th grade. Quincy Jones, actually, I got an offer from him. So I was about 15. But I wanted to finish school. And even my mother, she agreed with me. She was like, yeah, you need to finish school before. But they were going to fly me out to L.A. And the way that happened, he heard of me from his secretary who came to Detroit to watch the, I think it was Lennox Lewis versus somebody, boxing match. And so, anyway, she just happened to sit next to my band director. And they just hit it off. And he was like, I got this violin guy. So she actually came down, heard us play. And she said, hey, you got to meet the Q, And they called my parents, they called the school, but I declined at that time. So I still think it's a good choice. But that was like the only kind of big thing around my teenage years. But not until I got like in my 20s, that's when I got involved with another artist named Norman Connors. And so his big hit was You Are My Starship in the 70s. And went on the road with him for about 2.5 years. And so that's how I got a chance to connect with someone who knew Al. Right. And then get the Al Di Meola gig.
Yeah, that's one of the great stories of all time. And we tell a lot of people that your story at the shop. And Al actually told the story on his Facebook page, I think. I think our listeners really would love to hear how you ended up getting Al Di Meola. All right, we're going to take a quick little break here. I want to remind you guys to check out Evan on Instagram. It's at Evan Garr, EvanGarr. And while you're there, go ahead and look up the Electric Violin Shop too, at electricviolinshop.com. Of course, we want to thank our sponsor, D'Addario Strings, and take just a second to talk to you about one of their new offerings, the Helicore Octave Strings. If you play electric violin, you're probably familiar with their famous Helicore synthetic core strings. They are the most popular brand of strings with electric violinists, and they come installed on most high-end electric violins right out of the factory. Now, they're bringing you a set of octave strings. It's the same tuning as your 4 or 5-string violin, only down an octave. The low C on an octave violin is the same bottom note as a cello, allowing you to truly have a chin cello. Octave pedals are great, but they shift all the overtones and undertones too. So if you want a truly organic octave sound, the only way is to use octave strings. And because you guys are special, D'Addario is giving away a set of octave strings to 5 lucky listeners. Go to ddar.io/VR1 to register. Trust me, you want a set of these strings. So go to D'Addario.com to learn more or electricviolinshop.com to order some strings today. Now back to our interview.
So what happened was I was taking care of my mother, and she was ill, and she just passed not too long ago. Yeah. But she had to go into a respite facility, so that gave us as the family a break. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, you know what? Since she's going to be gone for a few days, I'm going to go out of town. And so Detroit is right next to Canada. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're literally 5 minutes from Canada.
Yeah, it's across the Windsor.
Exactly. And so I said, well, I'm going to drive to Toronto, which is about a 3.5-hour drive. And so I said, they're having the Jazz Fest, and I knew Meola was going to be there because I followed them as a young person. So I said, well, I'm going to go see Al Meola in Toronto. And got my car, took my instrument just because I wanted to get a picture. I didn't dream of playing with him at all. I really just wanted a picture. It's the honest to God's truth. And so got to the border, and they said, well, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to Toronto, see the Jazz Fest. And they said, really? And I was like, yeah, I guess they're looking. I'm some young kid, single, right? And they're like, well, so you're just going just to see the concert and then you're coming back home? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, okay. And they didn't believe me, so they sent me to customs. When I went to customs, they literally took my whole car apart. I had a Toyota Camry, like a 97 or something. And so they took the whole car apart looking for stuff. And so they found my instrument. And they said, well, are you coming here to make money? And I'm like, no, I'm not coming here to make money. I'm just coming here to see a concert. This is, one of my heroes, one of my influences. And so they didn't believe me. So I had to go in and speak to the customs person. It was a lady. And so she ran my record, and I didn't have anything. And so she even asked me, are you sure that there's not something that you did that's just not on file? And I'm like what? So
not like I would tell you.
Right, if it was, but no, so they finally let me go. And as I'm pulling off, they're like, oh, you'll never make it, just pessimistic. But I did make it. So the show was like at 8:30. I thought it started at 8, but it was about 8:30. I got there at 7:45. So got to Toronto. Again, this was just on a whim, so I didn't have a ticket.
No.
So I got there, and the show was sold out.
Of course.
It was sold out. So I told the lady, I said, was there anything you can do? I just went through customs. I drove 3.5 hours. And she said, well, there was some guy walking around, and he's selling a ticket. I don't know if it's real, but he's got a ticket. So come to find out, this guy, his son's wife had just went in labor. So he was trying to sell his son's ticket. And so that's how I got in the concert. So I bought that ticket. It was legit. And I got in, saw the show. So the female vocalist, Theanita Valentine, with Norman Connors, I texted her because she knows Al's percussionist, which is Gumby Ortiz. And so I said, hey, I'm at the Meola concert. I'm looking at Gumby Ortiz on stage. And so she says, well, I'm going to text him and let him know that you're there. So she did. And come to find out, after the concert was over, he actually walked around looking for me. I didn't know it because I ran back to get my instrument. I had left it in the car.
Right.
And so I ran back, got my instrument. So as I come up, I see that Al's kind of winding down from talking to the crowd. And so I pull my instrument out the case, and I said, well, maybe if he sees it, he'll say, hey, what is that? And it'll pique his interest.
Right.
So anyway, I did that, and instead of Al seeing me, Gumby seen me. And he said, hey, are you that violin guy that knows Theo? And I'm like, yeah. So he said, you ain't got to stand in this line. He's like, come back here. So he pulls me in the back, and he asked me to play for him because he wanted to make sure I could play before he introduced me.
Yeah, because, you know how it is. Everybody can play, right?
Exactly. So I played for Gumby, and he digging it, So he was like, oh, man, you gotta meet Al. So Al, finally, about 20, 30 minutes later, he comes in his dressing room, and he was tired, obviously, just did a show. And so he's like, yeah, it's this violin guy, a friend of a friend. You got to hear him play. So Al's like, oh, all right, well, I'm kind of tired, but, violin,
Right.
So anyway, he let me play, and I played his famous Race with Devil.
Right.
And so when I did Race with Devil, he says, whoa, he's like, he's playing my lines. And so he says, keep playing. And him and Gumby starts doing beats on the table as I'm playing, and he really enjoyed it. And so then he told me to keep playing. I was just sitting there playing for maybe about 15 minutes. And he just sat back and chilled and listened, talked to Gumby. And so finally he invited me to come to Montreal. Because they were doing the Montreal Jazz Fest, which is like the biggest
huge.
fest. Right. And so I had to drive an additional 6 hours to get to Montreal. But he gave me some gas money. He's like, hey, I'll give you gas money if you think you're going to come. And I was like, yeah, I'll come. So I made the decision to go. Got there in my broke down Toyota Camry. Right. With the check engine light on. Right. But I got there, and so we played. The audience really enjoyed it. We got great feedback. And so Al invited me to come to New York. And so I went to New York the next 2 days. And so from then on, I've been with them, So
What a great story.
Yeah.
It's like opportunity meets preparation.
Exactly.
Fantastic. So you've got a little bit of an unusual job in that you're a featured soloist with the band, but also when Al is soloing, you're basically his rhythm guitar player.
And yeah, pretty much.
So you've developed some techniques. I'd love to have you show us some of these techniques that you developed for basically playing rhythm guitar on a violin.
Yeah, it's I don't, and this is where I kind of, because I don't know how to explain it the best, but I'll try. But so basically, if I was doing a line, I'll do like what's known as mutatola. So I'll say. And so just providing a rhythm, almost like a guitar would do with some chicken picking, as they call it. So then, I may do some strumming too. So. Something like that.
Yeah.
Minus the finger hitting the But anyway.
Yeah, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
And yeah, you want to show us some other stuff that you get to play, or maybe some stuff that you've got. So maybe some techniques you develop.
So, like with me, as you can see, I'm adjusting my bow. Now, most people, this may be a typical, I don't know, it's maybe something like that. So that may be typical for classical players. I don't really, for my playing style, I don't like to tighten my bow that much. I kind of go with a very low tension. So usually what I do is I'll go just to, like it's about, as you can see how loose it is. So then I'll tighten it up just enough to where it's got just a little bit of tension, but it's still got enough. And the reason why, I'll show you. Because I don't really use a lot of arm in my playing. So I'm more of a wrist and fingers playing. So that might be a little too. So. So it's more of a wrist and a finger action, almost like a guitar player. And so that's why if I have a lower tension, it's not as much resistance from the bow here when I'm trying to just do wrist and finger action. Right. So if I had a higher tension, and just to give you an example, for me, I don't have as much control. So I can still do it, but it's not as, I'm kind of messing up now. It's a lot of bounce.
It's bouncy.
A lot of bounce. So if I don't have that much tension, it lessens the bounce and gives me more control.
Okay.
So.
Now you were telling me a story where you gotten in a bit of a mess one night. Where, the bow had literally come apart on you in the middle of a show.
Right. So and this is actually the bow. So if you see here, I don't have a tip anymore. So what happened was I was doing an outside event, and I guess because of the humidity, that's what the bow repair guy was telling me. But the humidity, as I'm playing, caused the hair to actually separate itself and the wedge that's in there. So this wedge just kind of pulled right out. So what happened, when that happened, I got hair all over the place, but I knew from when I was younger, just experimenting. I was trying to make bows at one point just to see how they worked. So I took my bow apart, and I remembered that the actual, if you're using a carbon fiber bow like this one, it still resonates. Now, I'm not sure, it might be the same with wood bows, but I know for sure with carbon fiber it resonates. So I actually had to finish that song like this. So I'm not even using the hair.
The show must go on.
Right, exactly.
And this is why you always carry two bows.
Exactly, and I did. So while that's happening, you know, my stagehand, if you will, he's getting my other bow out the case and getting it all, you know, ready for me. That's how I had to finish the song. Yeah.
Well, with that segue, talking about bows, we're going to take a quick break here to talk to you about Kodabow, the premier maker of carbon fiber bows for violin, viola, cello, and bass. Now, we should mention when Evan talks about the tip of his bow breaking, the bow itself didn't break. It's just a little cap that goes on the end. So until you're getting into bows that cost as much as a car or a house, and who's going to take one of those on a rock stage, you really ought to look at carbon fiber. There's a couple of reasons we really like carbon fiber bows. They're way more repeatable than wood bows. I mean, wood comes from trees, and trees grow kind of unpredictably. One branch is really not like another. Carbon fiber is manufactured in a highly repeatable way, meaning that one Kodabow Diamond NX is very much like another. From an environmental standpoint, that means no one's tramping through a rainforest to cut down trees to make these bows. And because of this, a $500 carbon fiber bow is going to compare very favorably with a $1,000 wood bow. And you don't have to worry about snapping it if you drop it. Kodabow has products for a wide range of budgets, starting with their Prodigy bow for just over $300, all the way up to the brand new Marquee bow for over $1,000, which is a truly spectacular bow. You can go to electricviolinshop.com to order your Kodabow today. Now we're going to get back to Evan's interview in just a second, but I want to hear him play some more. This track and the previous track are from his earlier release called the Chill Out album, and I highly recommend picking that up on iTunes. It's a really, really good piece of work. So, you mentioned Jean-Luc Ponty earlier.
Yes.
You guys are friends.
Yes.
And you're actually going to get a chance to play with him this summer, right?
Yes. Yep. So June 21st in Detroit at Shane Park. And everybody is probably familiar with the Live at Shane Park CD that he did.
one of his best works.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But he's coming back to Shane Park, and he's going to have me play on a couple of numbers, probably somewhere towards the end maybe. Right. I don't know exactly, but
are they going to record again?
I'm not sure. Now, that's a good question. I'm not sure, but I know I'll be there. So if they do,
yeah, for sure.
Well, we know it'll probably be on YouTube or something. So
well, and that's the thing nowadays is that everything is so accessible.
Exactly.
You're a little younger than me, but I mean, I'm sure you remember a day when it wasn't that you could just see all the artists that you wanted to see by going to YouTube. It was you had to get vinyl, or you had to get a CD or whatever,
or purchase tickets just to go to the show.
Right.
Exactly.
So when you're self-taught and you're learning all these jazz licks, are you able to hear these things in real time, or do you have a way to slow this stuff down? Or
Good question. Yeah. So my method, I didn't have a way to slow it down. So I would take pieces of the lick. So for example, if the lick is one of Jean-Luc's licks is so I would literally have to pause the tape And I'm saying tape, so that's letting you know how far back. The cassette tape. So when he would do, I would hit stop or hit pause, and then I would practice that. And then I hear the next part, and I said, okay. Then you connect them. And I said, okay, well, what's after that? So that was my method. And so eventually, when you hear the whole phrase, then when you practice it slow, and you always have to practice it slow.
For sure.
Always. So you would... and you can put it together. Right.
Awesome. So do you use a slow downer now? Or are you still sort of going old school? It's just, I'm going to make myself battle through this and learn.
Exactly. Even with Al, it's funny because he's got some of the hardest lines. His music is similar to Chick because that's his background with Chick Corea. Yep. So those Chick Corea / Al Di Meola lines, he does the same thing actually. So we'll take part of the line.
Okay.
We'll make sure that that's clean. Then we'll add the next part. Okay. Then we'll add the next part. So eventually, when you put it all together, you'll have that full line in the song, whatever the song is.
Right. Now, I sort of feel like maybe that it takes you longer to learn a lick the first time when you're doing that, but it helps you build those listening skills. True. So when you get on stage and he pulls out something new, maybe he gets the Holy Ghost and he pulls out something new. And so now you've developed that listening skill that you can absorb that lick in real time and maybe feed it back to him with a twist. And that allows you to improvise better and listen better in a real situation.
No, that's true because even a lot of times he'll write while we're on the road. He'll just write a new line, and you have to be ready for that. So that it kind of helps that I do know how to read to an extent because I can read the notes, but then like you just mentioned, now you have to put it together rhythmically, and so hearing the piano player practice the line. Hearing Al practice his own line that he wrote, you can, even though you're reading it on the paper, you can see how it fits. Oh, that's how he's doing it. Okay. So by me being able to hear, I can pick it up. And so when he says, okay, let's play it, now I can pretty much play it, Right. So you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me more maybe about sort of your practice techniques and how do you sort of structure your practice life?
Yeah. Most violinists that I know of, they usually practice scales, and I do too, but it's not like I wouldn't practice like I wouldn't get up and just say, well, let me just do a C scale or do a C sharp minor 7 and all this other. See, I don't do that. I'll take music or songs that I like, so that way it'll keep my interest.
Right.
And I'll actually play the licks, which are essentially scales.
Right.
So I'll take, like for example, we mentioned Jean-Luc, but maybe even some Meola stuff. So he's got all these weird licks, which uses all those different modes of scales. So really, I'm practicing scales, but I'm practicing a song that I like too, so it makes it more interesting than just sitting there doing a C scale or a E flat scale or whatever. So that's what I do. So I practice licks from songs, which are essentially scales.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So you're probably a couple hours a day when you're home.
Oh yeah,
right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And then when you're on the road, what's
two?
What's practice life like on the road on a bus?
On the road, it's a little difficult. So pretty much like with shows like this, we get 3-4 days rehearsal. So that's like our big practice. But we don't really have to practice like every day because we're playing every day and we have sound checks every day.
Right.
So those sound checks are really like our warm-ups / rehearsals. So that's how it is on the road. We really don't. On the bus, you're kind of just trying to rest and enjoy each other's company, Right. So yeah.
Cool. So what's coming up next for Evan Garr? You're actually out with Al for a month or so now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then after that, it's just, you've had sort of a major life change at home.
I did have a major life change at home.
And
I've been working on my second CD for a while now. I did one CD back in like 2005, 2006. So I'm trying to finish the second production now. And so that's going to be probably my main focus for the next 2-3 months.
Okay.
So that way by June, I'm hoping we can be finished. Me and my partners back home, my music buddies. So we can put it together, have a finished product, and then start pushing it,
So you've got a studio in your house.
Yes.
And then, so that's where most of this stuff happens, or are you recording somewhere else?
That's like tracking. Like we do tracking there, but then we go to some professional studios back in Detroit to like do the actual recording and the mix. Sure. Well, not recording, but so I can track some stuff at the house, but then you'll take like the WAV files,
right?
And then you can mix them and master them and so forth.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, we won't give too much away, but there are some other big players in the music business that have taken notice of you and your talent. I don't know if you've talked to Quincy Jones again since high school.
No, I haven't. No, I haven't talked to any of his people.
Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about another sort of major name in the business, and we'll sort of see where that heads out.
Okay. Yep.
But that's there's the nice thing about being on a tour like this is all the big name people, they know who Evan Garr is now, and they've seen you and they know what you're up to and what you can do. So have you had any job offers come out of being seen without?
Yes and no. More so not like to play with somebody else, because I think there's a respect, so
Sure.
they're like, oh, you're still with Al, finish that run, but we want you to record with us.
Right.
So there's been a lot of people that say, hey, come to LA. We got work for you. In fact, when we were just in LA, Philippe Sace, he's our keyboard player, and he actually did a lot of these songs that we're playing today without. They recorded them back in the late 70s and 80s. But Philippe's big with PSP, so that's Simon Phillips, Philippe Sace, and Pino Palladino.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so when we were in California, he introduced me to a lot of his buddies, and so they're trying to work with me if they can. And so that was great because they do movie stuff.
Yeah.
So that's another avenue. Instead of just doing road tours, now you can do some movie things. So we don't know. We'll see what happens. So it's a lot of doors that's open.
Right.
Like you mentioned. So we just got to see what happens.
Yeah. Again, opportunity meets preparation.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, tonight's the first night of the tour, and you guys have been practicing. I'm really excited to see the show tonight. And man, I really appreciate you doing the interview.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Man, I feel terrible interrupting this, but thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of Rockstar Violinist. Whatever platform you're on, please be sure to click subscribe so that you can get notified every time we post another episode. Next week, we're going to feature a violinist from a completely different genre. We'll be talking with Rachel Grace, who is one of the first in a growing number of EDM or electronic dance music violinists. She's a great talent, a super nice person, and a really fun interview, so I know you'll enjoy that. Now, we're going to let you get back to listen to Evan for a few minutes. This is with his band in Detroit called 313 The Live Experience.